2023 feels very similar to 2017, as once again it was one of the biggest years for video games. 2017 released two of my favourite games of all time, that being Mario Odyssey and Breath of the Wild. And not only did this year have another mainline game for both of those series, but in general there were just so many spectacular games released all throughout the year. Personally, I didn't play that many games that released this year, but that doesn't mean I still didn't play a variety of unique games from recent years. In fact, I played so many that I'm only going to talk about less than half in this video. Much like last year's video, I'm going to talk about the worst games I played and then the best games I played. But just keep in mind that most of the bad games that I played really weren't that bad, just rather disappointing or questionable in a lot of aspects. So 2023 was probably the first year I actually started using Steam more. I've never really used it as I would mostly play games on consoles, but recently I realized that Steam is a goldmine for interesting free games. There's some genuinely good gems that have a lot of potential, but then there's okay I pull up. And this is possibly the stupidest game I've ever played. Me and Pango spent over an hour in this game, racing to see who could finish first. But the game is just so bullshit that we never ended up finishing.
Oh, I'm on the vine again. No, I fell off the vine!
I'm gonna soak you in piss. The game consists of turning your capybara, then charging up a jump. It's like a 3D version of Jump King, but it's a free Steam game made by one person. So I can't say I was expecting a masterpiece, but I gotta say this is one of the most infuriating games I've ever played. The similarities to games like Jump King and Getting Over It make it weirdly addicting. Like, nothing about the controls feels satisfying at all. It takes forever to charge up a jump. The game looks like absolute shit. The level design is garbage, and this goddamn vine section is evil. Yet, I still feel the need to play this game for over an hour. In conclusion, never play this game, because it will make you hate yourself for playing it any longer than a minute. But if you do play it, could you please tell me how to do the final jump? Because I would really like to know. I want to complete this game so I never have to think about it again. So this is probably the weirdest game I've ever played. Not in terms of style or gameplay, but just in terms of how does this even exist? If you're unfamiliar with the Leisure Suit Larry series, it's probably a good thing, as this game is nothing like the rest of the series. Of what I've found, the games are usually point-and-click adventures, centered around Larry who unsuccessfully tries to seduce women. It was a series that was always based on comedy, and this entry definitely still has the same premise as the original games, but this game was released in 2004, and it really shows. It's the only 3D entry in the series, and it feels like an open zone game with a collection of shovelware minigames. One of the main minigames that's featured in this game is this weird navigation minigame. Most encounters you have with people will have this minigame tied to the conversation. It's cool how you can purposely mess up and the game will give you some funny story about the object. However, a lot of the time the humour falls flat, but I do think this game can be genuinely funny sometimes. It's that raunchy style of humour that the early 2000s were plagued with. But for someone who grew up in this era, it's really nostalgic and quite comforting. I also love how much effort went into the interactivity of this game. Like, almost every object and person has an observation.
Shriner fact. The first Shriners Hospital for Children opened in 1922.
Piece of paper so I can write that down.
I found it so fun to just observe as much of the environment as I could, because this is usually where the game's humour shines the most. This game is truly nothing special when it comes to actual gameplay, as most of the minigames are repeated multiple times and weren't that much fun to begin with. But the experience of this game was nothing like I've ever played before. If you're a fan of movies like American Pie, or pretty much any college movie, this game will be right up your alley. But it's definitely a game you wouldn't want anyone seeing you play. So I kinda played myself by making a whole segment on it. One of the reasons why 2023 has been such a big year for me has to be Xbox Game Pass. By far, this is the best subscription service on the market, and I don't see any other company even try to match the value of Xbox. I also had PS Plus Extra at the start of the year, but there's only one game in this video that came from that service. However, Game Pass gave me 10 gaming experiences, and whilst a lot of them aren't mentioned in this video, I attribute my spark for video games coming back this year mostly due to Game Pass. That being said, Lapin was not one of those games. Immediately when you look at the game's art style, it gives off charming indie game vibes, and I guess it is that. I love the art style of this game, and it definitely ticks all the boxes for a cute indie game. It brings a lot of attention to detail when it comes to world building, and the character designs are adorable. But art style and vibes alone can't carry a game, especially when the biggest comparison of this game is Celeste. Much like Celeste, this is a 2D platformer that demands precision and patience. It also gives you a lot of bite-sized challenges, so there's not too much of a punishment for experimenting. But, unlike Celeste, I really can't get into the actual gameplay mechanics. Of what I played, there were only two mechanics when it comes to platforming. You can jump, as well as grab onto a wall and then jump further. Now there are some level gimmicks that show up to make this more difficult, but with such a limiting moveset, it's never really that satisfying to get through these areas. Additionally, you can cling onto the wall for as long as you want, and infinitely gain height if you keep jumping up it. Resultantly, this gets rid of the urgency that games like Celeste nail, as this sense of urgency fits the bite-sized design of this game so well. Both games want you to experiment with each tiny segment, yet Lapin lacks any depth to its controls, and therefore feels more like a waiting game than an intense 2D platformer. Even though Celeste is pretty well known for its story, it doesn't let it take over the flow of a level. Whereas here, gameplay is constantly stopped by dialogue, and most of the dialogue is an absolute snooze fest. I'm probably the last person to enjoy story in video games, but I definitely try to engage with the story if it ends up enhancing the gameplay or the overall experience. But I just found no purpose in the story being here. If anything, it sounded like small talk the entire time, and by about 30 minutes in, I gave up on this aspect of the game entirely. Which is a problem, cause goddamn is there so much freaking dialogue in this game. You cannot go more than 3 minutes without bumping into a stupid rabbit. I still want to give this game some props, as it looks like it was given a lot of care, and genuinely passionate people made this game. The art style alone shows how special this game could have been, but with the obvious similarities to Celeste present, it's hard not to compare these two games. And overall, this has nothing on the masterpiece that is Celeste. Even though I've placed this game in the worst category, I can't lie in saying that I really enjoyed parts of this game. Exploring the world is just so fun, and I feel like a lot of games have so much bullshit in them that really bogs down the whole experience. But when I think about the open world exploration in this game, it's pretty much all positive. You can go wherever you want, and the platforming is a constant boost of adrenaline. Getting into a flow feels so natural at times, and I never felt myself getting bored. But oh my god, is this game flawed in so many ways. For one, the level design is just random as fuck. Even though it can be pretty fun exploring and grappling onto these rails, the world does not feel structured at all. Most of the time there's just random rails that lead to the sky, and following these paths can feel pretty automated. As much as this type of open zone design appeals to my short patience, it's not particularly memorable. However, one thing that definitely is memorable are the bosses. I was surprised by how engaging a lot of the bosses are. In each level there are a shit ton of mini bosses. These can range from short challenges to Shadow of the Colossus type bosses with multiple phases. Approaching this boss for the first time was kinda mind-blowing. I mean, I had never played a Sonic game before this, but I was not expecting this type of scale from what is generally being perceived as a very mediocre franchise. Beating these mini bosses was a highlight for me, and despite the reward not being that great, the journey of beating these bosses is where the game shines the most. And that's because unlike most enemies in the game, you can't just mid-air attack them. Seriously, this attack was absolutely broken. Once I unlocked it, I could easily destroy every enemy. However, the mini-bosses all have unique weak spots that generally involve dodging some attacks first, then slowly reducing its health bar. I actually ended up liking the mini-bosses way more than the actual bosses. Even though these look like more impressive fights, the actual gameplay is very repetitive and not very skill-based. So even though I placed this in the worst category, I had a lot of fun with the first two worlds. The desert level was especially my favourite, as it felt so diverse in its objectives, whilst also having so many well-hidden secrets. Just running around and not caring too much about the main story was so much fun. For a while, this was the game I played if I just wanted to relax, while still challenging myself here and there. But everything about this game seriously starts to drag on by World 3. I wish I stopped playing at World 2, because even though this game is incredibly flawed, I had so much fun up until this point. But World 3 just throws everything fun about the exploration right out the window. First of all, look how awful this area looks. It's just a grey, disgusting area with little to no landmarks to make any area distinctive. Now, by this point, the almost automated design was starting to get tiring, but this level completely overuses this type of design. So many sections just lock you into this 2D perspective that is essentially just following a simple linear path. It's so baffling because it never did this in the first two levels. You maintain control of the camera most of the time, and these automated sections usually lead to some sort of challenge or unique area. But all these sections in the third world felt so pointless, and most of the time they didn't even lead to anything. It got so bad I tried to avoid anything that remotely looked like it would lead to one of these sections. It's really sad that this game just became unplayable by this world, as it's rare I just become completely addicted to a game. Even some games in the best category I didn't really become addicted to like I did with this game. I'll still remember how enthralled with this game I became, but I just can't forget how monotonous it became and ultimately soured the experience as a whole. Forager was a game that came out at a really good time for me. It was a couple of weeks after I had finished an amazing game that's featured later on this list. It was a period where I pretty much wasn't playing video games at all. I had tried a few games on Game Pass, but nothing was really clicking for me. I was pretty much only watching videos because the spark to play video games was gone after completing this certain game. But along came Forager and absolutely sucked me back in. This is a game that depends on its addicting systems to encourage you to further expand your base. There are so many different objectives and paths you can take whilst playing this game. It makes the simple act of collecting resources so addicting. I'd say the main point of this game is to level up your character by collecting resources so you can further develop your skills to unlock more opportunities. The game is an endless loop of upgrading and expanding, but unlike games like Minecraft, it feels a lot more bite-sized and achievable. I spent about 4 hours in this game my first time playing, and it felt like I'd achieved a lot in that time. It has that addictive type of gameplay that Animal Crossing has, but it doesn't take weeks to fully develop your village. I found that after about 20 hours, I had completed all that I wanted to, and I was fully satisfied with my experience, as I enjoyed all the different skills I had unlocked, and it felt as if I had explored the world thoroughly and interacted with all the aspects of the game. I tended to prefer expanding the map by investing in the economical side of the game than collecting resources to upgrade my weapons. This is where I had the most fun, just exploring and solving the world's mysteries. And this game does offer a lot of different content throughout its world map. Each region has its own mysteries and gimmicks, but overall the map size was a bit too small, so it felt as if I had fully explored everything by about 20 hours in. I still won't forget this addicting yet charming game that helped reignite my enthusiasm for video games. So here's the one great game I was able to find on PlayStation Plus. And that's because this game was made by the people who made Celeste. I only recently discovered this, but I don't know how I didn't recognize it. So for the second time in this video, I'm gonna compare a game to Celeste. But you can sorta see how this is a more arcadey version of Celeste. It still features the same style and feel of Celeste, but combat takes center stage and is a wildly addicting aspect of this game. You're set in an arena where you verse up to 3 other players, battling it out to see who the last one standing is. What makes this game so fun is how different each game tends to be. For every undefeatable strategy you think you have, there's always a way to beat it. You can jump on people's heads, so you would think keeping the high ground would be good, but as they're falling, someone can shoot an arrow up and kill you, or they can jump out of the way while shooting back to block the arrow, or they can fall through the bottom of the map and come out on top. Even though sometimes it feels like you're stuck, there are so many different ways to maneuver out of a situation and come out on top. Although I never got footage of it, games with my friends could go on for minutes, as we kept learning different ways to avoid arrows and use the power-ups to our greatest ability. Most games only last for a couple of seconds, and accuracy plays an important role in winning. There's only a few arrows in the game, so missing a couple of shots can leave you very vulnerable, but it makes every shot count. Even if you do end up losing all your arrows, the next round tends to start pretty quickly, so it feels action-packed most of the time. In addition to a fantastic multiplayer mode, there is a co-op / single player campaign. It is an excellent showcase of the potential this game would have as a full-fledged campaign. Genuinely, the only bad part about this mode is how short it is. I get that this is an indie game, and for how this game is priced, I feel like this package is more than worth it. But goddamn, I was craving more of this game mode. You work together to take on waves of different enemies that all have unique movement patterns as well as attacks. Games can get really intense as a large variety of enemies fill up your screen and demand precision on your part, and a lot of the later enemies challenge your default attacks, which requires you to think outside the box. Then the best part of this mode are the bosses. These fights can get ridiculously difficult as the attack patterns are so different to the rest of the enemies. But with how quickly it takes to fight, learning these attacks becomes very fun as you master the controls. This is a game mode I would highly recommend you play with someone else, as after destroying each other in multiplayer, it felt so rewarding to work together to defeat what seemed impossible on the first attempt. I would say get PS Plus for this, but don't even bother, because this game is ridiculously cheap. I get that indie games typically sell for less, but this is an extreme understatement of this game's value. It's no secret that the 2D Mario games were pretty lackluster for the good part of a decade. Nintendo found a formula for these 2D Mario games after the success of New Super Mario Bros. DS, and whilst each game has some differences, all these titles blend together in a pile of midness. Then with the release of Mario Maker and its sequel, it really seemed like Nintendo had given up on the 2D Mario games. But despite the endless possibilities those games created, they still lacked a certain identity, as you can't really add unique mechanics outside of what Nintendo has given you. Thus, the demand for a truly unique 2D Mario game was building up over the Switch era, and finally Nintendo came through with Super Mario Bros. Wonder. This game was everything it needed to be. The art style alone confirmed that this wouldn't be like past entries. This time, they were actually gonna try. I think the most refreshing thing to see was the unique level themes and enemies. Each level is bursting with a constant stream of new ideas, and just when you get used to a certain mechanic or hazard, you're throwing a dozen other things to get used to. And what exemplifies this most are the Wonder Seeds. When I first saw this showcase in the trailer, I thought it'd be a similar effect in most levels, where it just makes everything kinda trippy and move around. But I was surprised to find that most levels have a completely different effect. Sometimes a bunch of dinosaurs crash through the stage, sometimes you have to collect these coins, sometimes you flip the perspective, and sometimes you become cake. This is a really good one. I like this one. But the best effect comes in just level 2 of the game. I know they just couldn't wait to show this one off. Currently, I'm still playing through this game, and that's because of one of its biggest flaws in my opinion. I do still find the level design to be a bit boring. I'm not really sure as to why. Like I just said, there's constant changes in each level, as well as a bunch of unique level ideas. But most of these levels feel way too short. Like it barely feels like any idea is really explored. And resultantly, I don't feel as if the challenge is built up that much. There's a lot of secrets hidden all throughout the levels, which generally pad out the levels to last longer. But in terms of actual platforming challenges, I feel like this game is lacking a bit. Overall, this game is still fun, but for now, it's just not connected with me as much as I'd hoped it would. So before we get into the best of the best, I want to give some shout outs to a few games that I played this year, but didn't really feel compelled to put into any of the other categories. This was one of those games where the hype train kinda influenced me to get this one. I mean, I had never really played any modern game on my PC, and I already had Game Pass, so I thought I would check it out. But ultimately, nothing about this game interested me. Its open world felt like a bunch of tiny areas between an insane amount of loading screens. Everything about this game felt unintuitive, especially the UI. Of what I played, absolutely nothing was interesting about the gameplay. I guess I'm just not really a fan of these massive open world games that focus on atmosphere and story rather than actual engaging gameplay. This was a game I checked out for a video, and I genuinely enjoyed this game. It has nothing on the new Mario Karts, but I still enjoyed playing through the courses then discussing all of them. I feel like I said everything I wanted to about that game in that video, so there's no point talking about it here. This is a game I've seen multiple people recommend, and once again it was on Game Pass, so I thought I would check it out. However, I'm almost certain that every 2D Zelda-like game has an expiration date for me. I played Link's Awakening and got bored in 10 hours. I played A Link to the Past and it lasted like 4 hours. And with Tunic, I played about 4 to 6 hours. I sorta enjoyed the mystery of the island, and exploring can be fun, but eventually all the clues felt obtuse, and trying to discover new areas in the map was exhausting. I just don't really enjoy these types of games that much, but I genuinely think this is a pretty good game. I initially got this game for Switch, but after learning how difficult the controls were for the game, it made putting in the effort to change things much more difficult than they needed to be. But this year I played the game on PC, and it works exactly how I wanted it to. I had a lot of fun with this game at the start, but after already experiencing everything I had done before, I eventually got bored of this game. And aside from that, I don't really have any major thoughts on this game, other than it's pretty enjoyable. This is one of those games that just looks stupid. It's if Rocket League actually made some interesting game modes. Granted, it doesn't control anywhere good as Rocket League, but it has its merit, and the concept alone is just very fun. This is the most recent game I've started playing, and it feels like I've only scratched the surface of what's to come. But I've had to put this game on hold for a bit, purely because December is just such a busy month for me. However, I wouldn't be surprised if this game were to show up on next year's video. For the past 2 years that I've done this type of video, I would say I only have a few experiences that reach this level of greatness. From 2021, those games were Jak and Daxter, as well as It Takes Two. Then in 2022, only Psychonauts 2 really reached the same level. But this year, I have 3 games that enter the legendary status of some of my favourite games of all time. I'm gonna go in order of how I'd rate these games, starting off with number 3. The concept of Tinykin is one of the most appealing ideas in my opinion. Exploring rooms within a house from a miniature perspective leads to some incredibly fun levels. However, what really sells this concept is how alive this world feels. From a childlike perspective, the world is filled with little bugs that populate and build on top of the rooms, which in turn creates an extremely creative environment. Every building and establishment within this world is built from real-life objects, which not only adds to this world's charm, but it creates some of the most engaging level design I've seen. It's so fun to explore toy forts and kitchen tops, whilst also being able to solve issues related to household appliances. The creativity that's bursting from every level is unheard of. The movement in this game is solid, and just adding mechanics like the soap bar and bubble make navigating these huge worlds a breeze. Because to really explore these levels does take a while, and having rails that you can grind along makes this so much more enjoyable. The bubble is also a great system, as to upgrade your gliding range you need to collect these pieces of pollen. These are sprinkled all throughout the level, with some big amounts being tied to objectives. Personally, I wanted to 100% the levels regardless, but it does give a great incentive to collect these, as certain areas need you to have more bubbles. Now, throughout this whole segment, you might have noticed these little creatures that follow you around. These little guys are what make this game so unique. Each level has a new type of Tinykin. The first level introduces the pink Tinykins, which essentially help you carry objects around to solve puzzles. These guys are great, and just collecting an army of them throughout the level is extremely satisfying. Like, this game won't skimp out on giving you these guys, and ultimately it makes you build up this insane cult of Tinykins very quickly, which feels so great to actually feel powerful. But that's only the first level. With each subsequent level, a new Tinykin is introduced. There's the bomb Tinykins, which help you unlock new areas and solve puzzles. The green Tinykins that create a pole that essentially acts as a ladder. The yellow Tinykins that build bridges, and the blue Tinykins that can be placed to help continue the flow of electricity. But the best thing about each subsequent level is how it builds off the last one, so you get a combination of all Tinykins working together, which just opens up the level to such diverse level design and objectives. The green ones were my favourites, as they really opened up where I could explore without absolutely breaking the game. There were only two complaints I had with this game. The first being how it was sometimes difficult to know what you were doing. These levels were so big, and within them are a lot of NPCs. Now, don't get me wrong, I love talking to these guys, as it was super cute seeing the stories that they had, but it's impossible to tell which NPCs have missions for you and which ones just want to talk. It'd be great if there was a little marker above the character when you went to talk to them, as a lot of the time I was just searching for something to do, for someone to tell me about some other BS. But this game's biggest flaw is how harsh the requirement to beat the levels are. Like, you really have to explore the level to beat it. Although it seems like you have an army of Tinykins, you pretty much need all of them to complete some of the objectives in this game. And this just results in a lot of backtracking and mindless wandering. It was always so fun to start the level, as there's collectibles everywhere, but once you get to the end of the level, there's a lot of exploring the same areas you've already been in. That's why this is one of those games I only really want to play once. I had an incredible first time playing this, and it will go down as one of my favourite 3D platformers. But I don't want to go through the pain of exploring a world I feel like I completed ages ago. Still, the charm of this game is off the charts, and maybe if you're not stupid like me, you'll love this game even more. Solar Ash is one of those games that plays as well as it looks, and oh my god does this game look beautiful. The art style has such a simple cel-shaded design to it, but the overall vibes and colours used here paints a beautiful world that's only a shadow of what it used to be. This is a world on the verge of destruction, with malicious goo covering the otherwise breathing environment. This malicious goo is giving the enemies within this world life, as they try to attack you all throughout the game. The combat in this game is very simple. In fact, there's only one sort of attack. Later on, I discovered you could dash around to avoid enemies, then attack, but primarily, this is a game about momentum. You can take out enemies at a slow pace, but I feel as if dashing through these areas, avoiding enemies, or quickly slashing them contributes to the intense feel of this game. Because despite this looking like an open world 3D platformer, it's more of a linear experience that relies on connected sections to branch together its world, and the movement and level design complements this perfectly. Many of the puzzles consist of points you need to slash in quick succession, with it spicing it up later in the game by adding obstacles that require you to think outside the box. However, most of these types of puzzles are the main objective in the game, as you'll generally platform through linear courses to get to these areas. Each zone has a couple of these, as well as some other hidden collectibles, but the idea is to destroy these living goo-like creatures that reciprocate damage to the anomalies. These anomalies are by far my favourite part of the game. Their looming presence is always felt throughout the stage, and when they awaken, they walk throughout the level, and it's just such a crazy sight to see. Again, it gives Shadow of the Colossus vibes, as you have to navigate this world searching for an entry point to this massive beast. I never got footage of this level, but with this boss, I distinctly remember having to cross the poisonous lake to only just launch myself onto the anomaly before I blew up. Having these anomalies actually interact with the level is so spectacular, and it adds a grander scale to these fights. Additionally, the so-called fights tend to be my favourite platforming challenges. These can be very difficult as you're put under a strict time limit and there's just little room for error. Some of these bosses took me up to 20 attempts to beat, but the satisfaction from defeating them is immense. Overall, this is a game that exudes confidence in every aspect of its gameplay, and chaining together its fast, smooth gameplay with intense platforming based challenges results in one of the more unique 3D platformers I've played. Moreover, this will go down as one of the most memorable games I've played. If you have Game Pass, definitely check this one out. So, I've been kinda scared to talk about this game, because I have no idea how to put into words how exactly I feel about this game. Like, I wrote down so many notes about this game all throughout my 200-hour playthrough, but I feel like the best compliment I can give this game is it makes Breath of the Wild, what I'd otherwise consider a perfect game, seem like a beta version of this game. Sure, this game still has some issues that carry over from the last entry, but the sum of its parts creates a video game that is leagues above anything I've ever played. And I doubt there will ever be a game just like this for a while. The lead up to this game was one of worry and skepticism for most fans, as it really took a while for Nintendo to show any type of new content that differentiated this game from Breath of the Wild. It was especially worrying finding out that the same map would be used, as so much of the magic of the first game came from exploring the world of Hyrule. But after the gameplay demonstration trailer was released, it finally made sense why this game had taken 6 years to make. These powers are so impressive, and I can't even begin to imagine how difficult it was to get them working on the Switch hardware. Recall is the least impressive power in my opinion, however it's still better than anything offered in Breath of the Wild. I always thought the powers in Breath of the Wild were helpful, but never really mind-blowing. Whereas here, I find so many different uses for all these power-ups that not only help with puzzle solving, but could be coupled together to create some out-of-the-box thinking for any situation in the game. Like the fact that you can pair Ultra Hand and Recall together shows how willing Nintendo were to give as much freedom to the player as possible. Ascend isn't as groundbreaking as the other powers, but it became so convenient throughout the game and really helped with exploring this world. I love how broken this mechanic was, as if there was some area I felt was impossible to reach, using a bit of creativity would allow me to solve an issue on my own, and resultantly I felt so accomplished when it worked. And that's also another great thing about this game. All these ideas that seem next to impossible or too complex to actually work end up being a lot more simple. Like very early in the game, I stumbled upon a lost Korok who needed to cross the river. I thought about flying him over for a bit, and in my mind I was just thinking, this is gonna go so horribly. But the game's physics engine really simplifies how things work, and it results in a consistent system that rewards creative thinking over complex designs. Sure, you'll see a bunch of giant mechs that no one in their right mind will actually create, but then you see something like this, which is just so simple, but all it takes is an idea and a couple of resources. Ultra Hand is such a great ability on its own, and despite it taking a few hours to get used to, it's very simple to create basic contraptions after a while. But what I find most impressive about this is how many different uses you can get out of it. The game is designed so incredibly well that this massive world always gave me new experiences and ways to use Ultra Hand. Whether that's creating machines, fighting enemies, solving shrines, reaching hidden areas, or just general puzzle solving. But for me, the power that really transformed this game was Fuse. One of Breath of the Wild's most controversial features was weapon durability, and whilst it's still here, Fuse pretty much gets rid of everything that made that system so bad. It's no secret that most people ended up avoiding combat altogether, as fighting enemies broke powerful weapons without actually gaining anything of worth back. But with this game, Fuse allows you to actually gain materials from these enemies that go towards making you stronger. And I love the combat in both these games. When I reached this threshold in Breath of the Wild where I couldn't reasonably fight enemies, it was kinda sad, as I loved the thrill of most encounters, and how you really had to master the game's mechanics to not just die at every encounter. With this game, you're incentivized to go into every battle to collect all different types of materials, cause oh my god is there an almost unlimited amount of possibilities when it comes to Fuse. The fact that there are different reactions to fusing things to all types of weapons creates an overwhelming amount of possibilities. Like, some materials are sharp so they act like axes, whereas fusing a giant boulder to your sword makes it useful for breaking ores. Some materials have a lot of damage, so fusing it to a long weapon allows you to swing around and just demolish everyone in sight. Some items are pretty useless fused to a weapon, and then you find out they have a greater use on an arrow. I could go on and on about the possibilities in this game, but I find it so wild that you can go 100 hours in this game and then just randomly discover a new use for an item. Like, it took me 80 hours to realize Muddlebud would get enemies to start fighting each other. But this is also coming from someone who realized 90 hours into the game that you could upgrade your battery life. It also took me 100 hours to realize that geoglyphs had memories in them. That one was just stupid, to be honest. But that's what I love about this game. It is a game of discoveries all throughout. This world is jam-packed with content, and it creates the most addictive gameplay loop ever. You'll see something in the distance and go and investigate, then on the way you'll get distracted by a million different things, and the game rarely holds your hand in these discoveries. It lets your curiosity get the best of you, which results in you just losing track of time as you experience all different types of missions and quests. I will say that a lot of things get repeated, especially with the blessing shrines, that typically involve collecting a green rock and returning it to a shrine. They do spice these missions up sometimes with you fighting a Talos to get it, or launching it out of a hole, but this leads me to one of the more disappointing aspects of this game. This was a major part of the marketing for Tears of the Kingdom, and it gave the impression that for those wanting some new areas to explore, we would be rewarded with the Sky Islands. But in all honesty, outside of the tutorial area, these Sky Islands were a bit of a letdown. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of cool things up here, and getting up to them was rare for me, so at the start of the game I loved how they switched up the gameplay. But if you've completed this game, you'll know how repetitive these can get. It's so defeating getting to a new Sky Island just to see this exact design again. It was definitely cool getting the stone back for the first time, but eventually I had a system that would work every time, and it became annoying to see these islands. And what's really disappointing is how few there are in each region. So when you can already tell that every Sky Island is going to be the same experience, it made me tiresome of having to complete these, especially when all the shrines are just blessings. I could have maybe excused it if outside the Green Rock mission there was an actual unique puzzle inside, but this rarely happened. So the aspect of the game that was the most heavily advertised happened to be a letdown. However, contrary to this was the depths. Like with most people, this was an absolute shock to discover, as Nintendo were able to completely hide this aspect of the game, an inverted map of the overworld that kind of resembles the Dark World from previous games. I discovered this very early in my playthrough and instantly realized this was an area I shouldn't be in. I really just let go at the worst time for that. Wait, what? That's gone?
I'm in danger!
I adore the vibes of this place and how unsettling it becomes to be engulfed in darkness. It was especially interesting in the early stages of my playthrough where I had limited light sources and therefore had to create a car to get around. All throughout the game, I kept coming back here as it had so many different things to offer. Initially, it was just to discover the light routes and fight a couple of difficult enemies, but then I came down here to collect some resources, then I discovered some of the mini bosses down here, and let me just say, the first time I found a Frox, I shat myself. It was so scary. The depths provide so many different experiences, and a lot of the most challenging fights are down here. It was such an addicting aspect of the game to come down here and experience something familiar like traveling from base to base collecting Zonite, only for me to accidentally stumble upon some treasure or a challenging boss. Additionally, one of the main missions in this game occurs down here, which I won't spoil in case you haven't played the game, but it is genuinely one of the best missions in the game. There's so much more I would have wanted to say about this game, as it's truly one of the most incredible gaming experiences I've ever had. And for a game that took me 200 hours to beat, there's so many intricate details that come together to not only make this my favourite game of this year, but ultimately my favourite game of all time. For a while, Mario Odyssey held that title, but this is a game I just can't see any other game replicating. And whilst I'll probably never have an experience quite like this, I'm so thankful for the time I had, and I'll remember it for the rest of my life. So, like last year, I want to talk about some games I'm looking forward to in 2024, as well as the big upcoming titles for Nintendo. First up, we have The Plucky Squire, which was a game I talked about in last year's video, but since then there's been one new trailer. And funny story, just as I'm writing this, Devolver Digital released a behind the scenes video about this game, so I'm more hopeful that it's actually gonna come out this year. I was kind of worried about this game, it didn't seem like it was coming out anytime soon, but I think 2024 is the year it will come out. And I will be getting this game immediately, as it gives off the same vibes as games like Tinykin or It Takes Two. I love the blend of 2D and 3D gameplay, and most games Devolver Digital publish are given a lot of care, so I have no doubt this will be an amazing time. The upcoming Princess Peach game looks interesting, but at the moment it doesn't seem like a very in-depth kind of game. I can definitely see this as more of a puzzle-orientated game, which is fine, but I'll definitely have to see more gameplay before getting this one. So Mario vs Donkey Kong is a game I played back in the day on my DS, and I just straight up hated it. I'm sure this is great for some people, but I have literally no excitement for this game. Penny's Big Breakaway is a game that sparked my intrigue when it appeared in one of the Nintendo Directs. It looks like a speedrun focused 3D platformer with a very interesting art style. This is a game I'm not entirely sure I'll get, but if it came to Game Pass, I would definitely check it out. And lastly, there's the Thousand Year Door remake. I briefly played this game a while ago, and it reassured that RPGs are just not for me. I think it'll be a game I'll watch people play, but I don't think I have the patience or interest for games like this. So yeah, once again, not that many games that I'm looking forward to, but honestly 2023 released so many spectacular games that just catching up on this year will probably last the whole year for me. So now that we're entering 2024, it actually is 2024 right now, I want to talk about the plans I have for this channel. Over this year I've dabbled in more scripted videos while still posting some gameplay videos, but going forward I want to have more of a focus on these scripted videos, as I've just kind of lost a lot of interest in the process of recording and editing gameplay videos. And honestly, I've been doing it for like 2-3 years, and it's just gotten really tiresome, whereas these scripted videos just feel a lot more engaging to me. Currently I'm in a situation where my internet is just unreliable and pretty slow, so although I've wanted to stream for a while, it's been impossible to do this. However, later this year these issues might clear and I might be able to replace the lack of like gameplay videos with some streaming. Hopefully down the line I can get more into that. So yeah, I appreciate all the support this year, and especially to the people who have stuck around from the beginning. Yeah, I appreciate the support on all the different switch ups from different content that I'm making, so yeah, can't wait to see what happens in 2024. But thanks for watching.